What the Museum of Outdoor Arts has always done best for 27 years is to create a space that brings celebration, it brings people together, it's part of business, commerce, culture. Lots of different identities of the space will happen because of what takes place there. And some of the best examples I can mention over the past 25, 27 years would be Harlequin Plaza, the Carrara Place building, certainly the Tuscany building and Greenwood Plaza. But I'd have to say the best project that I've ever worked on with my father, John Madden, would be the Palazzo Verdi building.
Well, I developed the building, and it went through probably 20 phases of design. I utilized my daughter and her experience, and along with her family, the family of the Museum of Outdoor Arts. And Roger Leitner, who's married to my daughter, has always had a fascination with labyrinths. And so as we're working with the architects, Roger's working with me, scheming out a design that emulates the Chartres Cathedral labyrinth. And along the lines there, we had a chandelier, my wife and myself, cast in Napoleon's time. And Lonnie Hanzon took that chandelier, which was from an Italian villa, and took the crystal parts and redid them into a 45-foot chandelier, which is now hanging in the atrium. And then the last piece was Todd Siler, who's connected to the Museum of Outdoor Arts. We commissioned him to do a spectacular 60-foot mural that surrounds where you leave the atrium and go into the elevator corridors of the building. But overall, impression-wise, coming to this space, it's very dramatic.
I mean, that was a big stretch jumping in at all those pieces in there, and it was expensive. But now look at it, you think, wow. I mean, you really had to have a lot of foresight to. Because I was there the day he said, okay, to all three things, and I thought, God, all three of them. Now we had to pull it off. I don't think anybody knows who drew it, but it's got a lot of different meanings to it, with the rosettes in the center and the number of lunations on the outside that correspond to the lunar cycles and that kind of stuff. This one is a exact replica of the one in Chartres, France. It dates back to the 12th century.
My interest in it was taking this gorgeous design and watching how the workers, the craftspeople, absolutely fell in love with what they were doing. And putting these pieces together and cutting these pieces in Denver, all with Colorado stone, but cutting these pieces with water jets, it was a fascinating experience. And through that, honest to gosh, I could experience vicariously how the great cathedral builders back in the Gothic times, how they must have felt when they were putting these edifices up.
This is one of our few quarries that we have. You can kind of see how the benches lay in here. We do a lot of drilling and blasting as we get deeper into the ground.
The stone wasn't selected because they got more points from it by mining in Colorado and only 75 miles away. But that's really what we wanted to use.
I'm not sure what they're trying to attack here, but I guess we'll figure it out in a second.
Just a big end loader, and you just bang it and beat it and pry it, and they blast to get pieces that are, the size of your car.
Just be careful. Watch out for flying rocks. Yeah, I mean, it's known to happen. I've actually busted out windshields doing this. Yep, flying rocks.
The cutting diameter of that saw is 4 foot, 3 or 4, something like that. It's a 10-foot blade. They're huge. And they turn it a certain way so you get the grain running the way it should, and slice it like a loaf of bread. Thinking about this thing for 12 years, I really wanted to do it precision cut with a water jet. Sometimes we don't see everything until it gets wet, but you'll see a lot of the color come out in the stone. There's even a color, almost a grayish blue that's coming out of that stone there, and then, I mean, this stone is beautiful. Find yourself just watching it because it's so fascinating. You know, and that thing is at 50,000 PSI. I mean, it's crazy. But God, it was just beautiful. It's a beautiful feeling when you take this piece and the radius, even without a piece there, the radius will tell you where it's supposed to go almost exactly because of the way this tails off, and it just fits perfectly, and you can usually leave that piece there, and when we lay all the in-between pieces in, they'll fit perfectly. Every piece has a number, and that's how we're going to track it when it comes time to crate it. It tells us we're doing a good job when the last piece fits like the rest of them. Now, if you could measure that gap between here and here, I don't know how you'd do it. It's less than a piece of paper, but it fits perfectly. So Drew and I give a high five, and then we go to the next row, which is going to be the black. And we laid it dry, like I said, but then we ran out of space, so we just had to go, okay, there's only one other way to do this. Got to cut them and box them and get them out there and see if they fit.
The Chandelier Chardon is a 38-foot spiral of glass with an antique Venetian chandelier sort of hung in the center of that spiraling cone. It has hundreds and hundreds of pieces. Just about every technique, every glass technique is used. They're cold cut, sandblasted, slumped, fused, torch blown. You know, the story and the form comes first. It usually comes in a very whole manner in my head of what's going to happen. Then I go to materials. Then I go to techniques. It's an important thing for me to see and hold whatever that vision is, but it's also an equally important thing that the artisans that are working with you have the respect for that vision, that they hopefully see it too, and that they work it physically. They're the ones that are working on it for months and months and months and months.
Sometimes you can't get, when you get an angle cut like this, you can't get it all, always. Or sometimes I'll just slam it on the table too and just edge it. So it comes right out.
So this one will give you an idea of the smaller piece, sandblasting it inside the booth here. So as you can see, I frosted this whole side. Now we'll flip it over and do the dark areas on the back. See, I think that's about it. The clear lines give your differentiation between all of your mediums and lights, and then you can see this nice light shade that we just barely speckled on there, and you can see it come through quite a bit.
One down and 440 to go. There's a little collet that goes in the end of the tubing that holds the glass on, and then this is what the glass actually goes into.
The chandelier goes from 18-inch pieces, which are about this big, down to the last bead on the chandelier is 2 millimeters, which is about 1/12 of an inch.
Now they're working on these wonderful pieces. They're actually blown, actually torch worked, and completely organic. Because if they get too complicated, then they're going to upstage all those other pieces that have. You know, it's almost like all those flat pieces have got to like just sort of become liquefied. You know.
Well, let me get a flat one. Do another process.
Try
And then we can twist some of these
Yeah,
too if
yeah.
you want to. But let me do.
Yeah, see what you can do with sort of amorphic.
I work in many different materials, so it's very important that I work with craftspeople and artisans, and that they're willing to stretch their own selves or in their own limits in order to achieve the work that we do. So we were in good hands there.
But see, that's nice, because again, it's something you wouldn't get in a slum.
Right.
Lonnie incorporated the old arms from Italy that were from a century-old chandelier. This is the center core basis of the chandelier design.
We came upon a shop and we said, "What's that?" And he took us in and he said, "This is an upside down Christmas tree that dates back to..."
The Napoleon era.
Yeah.
So the chandelier was made in Venice around the time of Napoleon.
Yes.
We had it shipped back and it was stored in Denver for what? 23 years.
20-some years.
Never been hung, just moved around from warehouse to warehouse.
Again, it was through a lot of experience and careful planning that we were able to use as many old parts of it as we used. We used most of the parts.
That painting called Ascension that was actually inspired by a poem, William Blake's poem, the first stanzas of which you'll recognize instantly: to see a world in a grain of sand, a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hands and eternity in an hour. They're made in sections over a period of a year, and I had to use a very large factory space to assemble all these pieces. Various parts are made in different ways, and they dry at different temperatures. That painting isn't simply on the surface. It's painted front and back, and it's actually impregnated, if you will. When I see a thought and I want to get it down quickly and put it down, and to reattach pieces or disconnect them, and sometimes I'll lay them down, and as I say, 2 weeks, a month, 3 months later, I'll say, that doesn't work there anymore. Often, I see the whole finished piece in my head in advance, and I always track with it, no matter how lost I get in the process, and sometimes I intentionally try to lose myself and not, construct anything in any logical way, but allow chance and randomness and all those wonderful elements, accidents, to happen. It's a completely intuitive, spontaneous, often confounding process, because the pieces have to tell you where they want to go. A texture, a color, a form will just drop down into the piece, and it was meant to be there. You can't argue, you can't refute it in a way. It's almost like we say in science, there's a ring of truth, You see it and your soul connects with it, and it was meant to be, and everything else can change accordingly. But it's a very organic, spontaneous way of constructing your thoughts and feelings and allowing them to just find their way.
some of the great great moments from film, like the Pope looking up in the agony and ecstasy and saying to Michelangelo, "When is it going to be finished?" This building was a bit reminiscent of that.
This is my Bible, and this is what I have to go off of. I think there's, what, 1,200, 1,500 pieces for this project. If one's off, you know, within a 32nd of an inch, nothing will work. See, I have a little too much mud underneath of it, so I need to pull it up and take some off.
Putting it down, they had to use suction cups because it absolutely had to go straight in. And then, just to check what he had under it so he didn't have voids or too much, because if he had too much, he couldn't get it down. He'd have to pull that up. You know, it's like something flat stuck in the mud and you try to pick it up. You know, it's like you're picking up the whole yard. I mean, it's just like that.
One more time. That's what you want.
It was a very physically demanding process to lay those pieces at that precision.
The moment of truth is coming soon for Roger. I said the moment of truth is coming close for you right now to see if this one fits in. And we do have to get it remade, because the $1 million water jet machines aren't always perfect.
It's not changing the overall radius, which means we're not growing in width, which means if that were the case, each time we start another ring, it would get wider, it would grow wider, and then pretty soon the gaps would get larger, and then once we got to that lunation ring, you can't hide a joint. I mean, there's so many lunations with so many divisions, and we'd probably have to redraw the whole thing, but I don't think we're gonna have to do that.
I could not do that. I could not be where that guy is. No way. This is gonna be one day. This is gonna be one hell of a day. That's what I'm thinking.
Well, it was very frightening to work with such old materials and the contemporary materials in a construction site. There were some real close calls. Very delicate balance of knowing how hard to, how you can push glass and how you can't push glass, and getting it to all fit very, very precisely. It has hundreds and hundreds of pieces. I was very blessed to have John Abbott of Bella Glass did all what we would call practical engineering or shop engineering, because every piece had to have safety features very often. Every piece had to be attached to another piece without vibrating or without shocking. And each piece was a different size, different shape. Yeah, it's very interesting. Nobody ever sat down and said, are we going to put a bunch of what would be considered almost sacred edge kind of pieces in a commercial lobby. But when you do take the three pieces and the Chartres Labyrinth by Roger Leitner, you have the painting Ascension, and then Chandelier Chardin, which is sort of this really interesting mix of things that inspired us, but at no time felt religious to us but just felt right and important and strong. and something that you could walk through that space and never pick up any religious or spiritual overtones, but you might feel them.
The whole atrium is based on phi, which is sacred geometry. And phi is a ratio, 3, 5, 8, and everything from nature in its perfection has that same equivalent of the Fibonacci series. Throughout history, whenever sacred geometry is used, people have used it to evoke certain emotions. The hope probably was that you would feel holy or humbled. Certainly you'd recognize the beauty.
No, I just tell people that go over and see it. See what you think. I mean, it's a pretty outrageous lobby, and nighttime is totally different than the day.
The Grace Cathedral in San Francisco has the other labyrinth of Chartres, and being a religious house, they talk about the emotional experience and the heart-throbbing feeling that you get, and how your breathing's different when you walk it.
This is kind of the grandmother or the mother of all the labyrinths, so we just recreated it. The thing about it, just take off your shoes and relax and just walk it at your own pace, and just let your head do what it's going to do. Think. Get to the center. Maybe think about the trip in, and is the trip out going to be the same thing?
Just the title of that painting, Ascension, with the color, it adds that color that was so necessary.
All of that high temperature, that flowing of like molten colors, those reds and burnt siennas and all those tones in that painting are capturing like a moment of euphoria, a moment of ecstasy, aha, eureka, whatever you want to call that moment that every human being has experienced. I wanted to break down the distinction between the observer and the observed, that you were looking at a part of your own mind, that your imagination was completing the work. And that's why I build these very large paintings that have that neural-like texture with imagery on them to suggest that what you see in your mind's eye is enveloping you. It's part of you, it's exterior to you, it's not just internal here. So I wanted to blur all those different distinctions.
When that chandelier is hanging above the labyrinth right in the center, a vibration occurs just through the energetic resonance between those two pieces.
This was inspired by a man that I had done some illustration about, Teilhard de Chardin, who was a Jesuit priest and paleontologist. And his work was the idea that geological, biological, and spiritual evolution could coexist, and that you went from geology to biology to newness, or spirit. And so the chandelier is built that way. It starts geometrically and becomes bionic, and then hopefully becomes spiritual by the time you get to the end, which ends in the center of the labyrinth. As a maximalist, I always design at least a couple of layers that I don't believe are visible to the naked eye, or there's a lot in that chandelier that would take a pair of very strong binoculars to see. But that's the point, because if it's not bigger than one viewing, that doesn't do anything for me, because that doesn't leave any room for mystery, and it doesn't leave any room for seeing something different. So yeah, I hope yeah, there are a lot of things contained in there, in its geometry and in its progression. It's all complicated enough that I hope that, people could look at it in many different ways, especially if you're like working in that place and you walk by it every day.
We've been there a couple times at night. It's just breathtaking. You'll have to come. see it at night.